Yeah, Paula. Okay, all right. Paula loves you. You're in good shape. You can preach now. She loves you.
It's got to be love for her to put up with me that long. A young man was in his house, and he was wondering, you can be seated, because he was listening to the news and he heard that a storm was on its way. And he heard that the floods were going to come. But he said, God's going to take care of me. The rains began. There was a knock at the door. Sir, you need to leave. The flood's coming. God's got me under control. Everything's good. The waters began to rise, and a four-wheel drive drove by. The guy got out. He made his way to the door. Man, come on. Get in the truck. I'll get you out of here. Now everything's going to be all right. Waters kept increasing. He had moved to the second story, and a boat came by and knocked on the window. Said, come on, get in. It's going to get worse. God's got it under control. He made it to the rooftop, and he's sitting there, and a helicopter came by, and a ladder was lowered. Sir, this is the last chance. Grab hold and we'll get you out here. Nope. I've got faith God's going to take care of me. Next thing he knew, he was at the pearly gates. And he asked God, said, I thought you were going to take care of me. And God looked at him and said, I sent someone knocking on your door. I sent a truck. I sent a boat. I even sent a helicopter. I gave you the opportunities. You chose not to take them. Sometimes we get in our minds that God's going to deal with our problems the way we see fit, not the way He chooses. And if it doesn't come the way we want it, then it's not good enough. And we miss out on blessings that God intended for us. If we could, turn to 1 Kings 18, 1 and 2. 1 Kings 18, 1 and 2. And the Bible says that it came to pass, after many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, talking about a famine, saying, Go show thyself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. And Elijah went to show himself unto Ahab, and there was a sore famine in Samaria. No rain, no growth, no nothing. People died because they were hungry. People died because there was nothing to drink. But God gave a promise. Drop down to verses 41. And Elijah said unto Ahab, Go up, eat, and drink, for there is the sound of abundance of rain. He didn't see it. He didn't know for sure it was coming. All he knew is it was a promise given from God, and he had put his faith in the promise that God had gave him. How many times do we have the promise, but we think back, God, are you really going to do it? So Ahab went up. He ate. To eat, to drink. And Elijah went up to the top of Mount of Carmel, and he cast himself down upon the earth, and he put his face between his knees. And he said to his servant, Go up now, look toward the sea. And he went up and he looked, and he said, as he comes back, there's nothing. And he said, Go again 7 times. And it came to pass at the 7th time that he said, Behold, there ariseth a little cloud out of the sea, like a man's hand. And he said, Go up, say unto Ahab, Prepare thy chariot, and get thee down, that the rain stop thee not. And it came to pass in the meanwhile that the heaven was black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain, and Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. And the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he girded up his loins and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. I don't know about you, but a cloud the size of the man's hand is not where I would probably find my hope in a famine. If we were able to bottle that up, to squeeze it out, I might get a glass of water. I might be able to get something a little bit to quench my thirst, but it's not going to last long, and it sure is not going to end a famine. But all Elijah needed was that one little sign that the promise was about to be fulfilled. Today I want to talk about, how do you perceive your promise? How do you perceive your promise? Sometimes we think we're bound because of history, and we think we're bound because of that. I was at the prison one day, and I was conducting a search. And I went into this one man's cell, and I had talked to him a few times, and he had these tattoos. And I could perceive by the tattoos he had some personal beliefs. That the color of his skin made him better than anyone else. So as I'm conducting that search, I found a picture that took me off guard. Because he's sitting there, big smile on his face, with his arm around man, did not fit my perception. So I had to ask him, I said, I see the tats. Now, this picture surprises me because this man's not like you. There's a difference. He smiled and he said, that's my brother-in-law. He goes, I'll do anything for that man. And I looked at him, he goes, growing up, I was in the eastern part of the state. And I only knew what I had been taught, what I was raised around. I got some of these tats prior to the military. And when I joined the military, I had to sleep, eat with people, with men that I had grown up to feel were inferior. And I found out that everything I had been taught when it came to that was wrong. But he was bound by the tats that he had on his chest. He was bound by the perception of those in prison because this group wouldn't accept him and that group wouldn't accept him no matter what he had felt now. And he realized that what he had been brought up wasn't always right. Perception can change a lot of things. What he realized, he was no longer bound by the chains of history. He was no longer bound by what he had been taught because he found out there was something more. In Genesis, in Exodus, the first part of the Bible, there's this exciting part of the Bible called the begats. It takes me months if all I'm going to do is read the begats to get through it, because it's like one verse and I fall asleep. But it talks about how this man begat this man and he died. This man begat this man and he died. This man begat this man and he died. But then there was a man by the name of Enoch who knew the Lord, walked with him, and he didn't know death because God called him up. You see, no matter how much we get trained on history and what's going to happen, because everything said Enoch was going to be like everyone beforehand, and one day he would pass away. That's the way life is. God chose to break that chain. I don't care where you've been. I don't care what you're from. I don't care what you're bound to. There is a God that can reach down in your life if you will allow him. He will take those chains. He will break them. He will set you free. I've experienced it. There is no reason I should ever be able to allow to stand behind a platform. But God said, I see more in you. I see something greater than you'll ever know. Sometimes we've got to get out of our perception and start seeing things through God's eyes. Nathaniel, would you come up here? Jonathan? Maggie, can I steal you for just a second? Would you mind come up here and stand beside your daddy? No, I need the big one. Now, I'm going to stand here, and I want you to stand behind me, okay? Here, stand beside me. Now, I want you to look out there. Stand here. Can you see everybody? Why not? Can't see everyone? You can see a little bit, right? Jonathan, would you mind pick her up and put her on your shoulders? Now what can you see? Everybody. Change of perception. Thank you, Maggie. When you're in a situation you can't see your way out, it's your perception. God always has a way out. All you've got to do is look for it. Get on your knees, pray, fast, get in the book. There's promises for every situation you're in. There is hope, there is knowledge in this book. It's up to us to dig it out. I was working in a tobacco field one time, and if any of y'all know, I don't work in tobacco very well. It's not my cup of tea, too much work. And we had taken a break, and I'd went in the back of the barn, and while the others were eating, I'd worked all night at the factory, and I went to sleep. I woke up to some guys, because I kept hearing this thud, thud, thud. And they were throwing dirt clods in my direction, and they didn't know I was there. What they were trying to hit was a wasp nest that was close to me. I got nervous because they were good at their aim. And they started coming out. If you had asked me if I could have got out of that area first, I would have told you I couldn't do it. You'd be surprised what motivation would cause. I made a way. When you're in something that you can't get out of and the trials are coming, God will make a way. He was on the mountaintop, and that servant looked out and he saw that little cloud the size of a hand. It doesn't take a lot of faith for God to move into your life. But it does take some. Faith the size of a mustard seed can move mountains. I will tell you right now, the storms and the rains that fall in the mountains is what's going to quench your thirst when you find yourself in the valley. If you have that mountaintop experience, you can make it through those valleys. You can make it through no matter what this world has to offer you, no matter what life throws at you. If you can just learn to put it in His hands. God can bring you through anything. No matter what you face, God is there. God will reach down, touch you. He can pull you out of the miry clay. There's nothing in the past, there's nothing in the future that God will not handle if you allow Him. But it takes you to let Him do it. Because you can set up boundaries, you can set up walls. And God was a gentleman. He's not going to push through them. But ask Him to help you. Ask Him to reach down. Ask Him to touch you. Try Him. See what will happen. He gives you a promise that everything's going to be all right. But your perception can put God in a box if you allow it. The Israelites, they found themselves up against the Philistines. They found themselves up against the Philistines throughout history, throughout the Bible. The armories of the Israelites were empty. The weapons of war were non-existent. If you would, could you pull up 1 Samuel 13 and 22? The Israelites had went in and they took their farm tools and they began to sharpen them and to turn them into weapons of war because they didn't have anything. In fact, if you looked out through Israel, there were no swords. So it came to pass in the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan. But with Saul and with Jonathan his son was there found. What was found? There were 2 swords in all of Israel. 2 swords to defend the country with. The Israelites, throughout their history, had seen how God reached down and had brought them out of trial after trial after trial. And the king of Israel found himself with his sword in his hand. Go to 1 Samuel chapter 14 and 2. And Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah, probably saying that wrong, under a pomegranate tree, which is near Migron. And the people that were there with him were about 600. The enemy is at your door. They are ready to take your life, ready to claim everything that you have. And where do you find yourself? Sitting under a tree, trying to get shade. 600 men that are there to battle. But you choose to sit. King Saul, do you want to go fight him? No, I just think I'll sit here and look at my sword. See how sharp it is? Beautiful, ain't it? The blacksmiths did a really good job on this. I'd hate to get it dirty. I'd hate to have to put it to use. 600 men ready to fight, ready to do battle. But he chose to have them sit around. And perhaps he started telling stories of what God had done in the past. And what God could do then. But I believe with his attitude when he found himself under that pomegranate tree was there was a day God could pull us through, but I don't think it's today. There was no doubt in my mind that Saul was not perceiving his situation or the promise that God had given him. He's found himself looking in an area that he shouldn't have been looking in. But luckily, that wasn't the only sword. Drop down to verse 6, please. And Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, "Come, let us go over into the garrison of these uncircumcised. For there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few." What he realized is this sword is not going to save us. But the God that I'm going to fight for is going to pull us through. And he began to make his way up a thorny path. Thorn bushes, pointed rocks. Not the best area to be. But he began to make his way up and he began to fight. And one by one, the enemy fell. Why does it take one man to actually see the promise, to get the others to realize there's a chance. Because one man got a vision. And finally, the others were willing to follow. Are you going to be Saul? Or are you going to be Jonathan? Are you going to sit there under the pomegranate tree when trials are coming your way and give up? Or are you going to be like Jonathan, as long as there's air in my lungs, as long as there's breath in my life, this is worth fighting for? What decision are we going to make? I find David very interesting when I was growing up. And the things that he went through. You know, they talk about when he went to face Goliath. And I've heard the story talk about Goliath. David went out there not knowing if he was going to lose his life or not. You know, that's a giant. He could kill him. I don't really believe that ever passed through David's mind. Because David had a promise that one day he would be king. One day he was going to sit on the throne. How could he sit on the throne if Goliath took his life? God made him a promise. He knew everything was going to be all right. He might not come out 100%. He might get injured, but he would still breathe when that battle was over. God was going to pull him through. How many times do we face things and we wonder, God, it's not going to work? He's given each and every one of us a promise. He has said he'll be there with us. Why do we doubt him? Why do we think he's not going to be there? Why do we think he's going to turn his head on us? I don't know about you, but he's never let me down. He's never turned away from me. I've let him down time and time again. But God has never failed me. If we could just learn to put our faith in his word, no matter what we face, he's with us. And he will answer our prayers. It may not always be the way we want it, but he will see us through. Could we stand for a few minutes? I want you to understand, God is here for each and every one. Sometimes we face trials, and I don't know why, and I don't understand how he's going to pull me through it, but he always does. I've told this story before. Made my way through the halls one night. The lights were off in all the cells, but there was one that the light was on, and I knew he was up to no good. And I was going to catch him. Because I always had fun doing that. And I snuck up and I threw that door open. And there he sat with the Bible study in a bag. I think that's what it's called. It's been a while. Someone had mailed it into him. And late at night, when most of them were up, trying to do this and that they shouldn't be, he had that laid out, and he had a Bible. Perception, he's a prisoner. He's a criminal. There is no hope. This man did not have any hope of getting out anytime soon. But someone took time to send him a little booklet, a little glimpse of hope, and he sat there and he was filling it out. If you have loved ones that have strayed, just put it in God's hands. If you have dreams that you've never seen fulfilled, put it in God's hands. When your health starts failing, you know where to go to. Just let it be in his hands. They're not the prettiest hands, They're not what you'd call beautiful because they're scarred. Because he let those nails be driven through them. Fulfilling just another promise. If you cannot see past your circumstances, get to a place where you can start seeing through other eyes. Get to a place where you can see over your trials. Get to a place where God can work the miracles for you. I appreciate each and every one of you for being here. And I hope I've said something that can reach down and touch you. It's not always in the spit and the speed. Sometimes it's just knowing and being reminded there is a God. He loves you. He will never fail you. Do not keep this promise to yourself, because we have a community to win. Jesus, we thank you that you've allowed us to come before you. We thank you for giving us your word tonight. We thank you for reaching down and ministering today. I ask that you would open our eyes to be able to see through your eyes, to see circumstances as they really are, not as we perceive them. We ask that you would be with us as we go our way. Continue to work in this community. Continue to work in this church. Jesus, for we know revival is coming. In your name we pray. Amen.